Welcome to the People Performance Podcast with me, Tracy Roberts.
Me, James Cooper.
And me, Kelly Marie Mitchell.
Kelly Marie Mitchell has joined our team. And today is the baptism of fire as she joins us on the People Performance Podcast. So welcome, Kelly.
Thank you.
How are you feeling about being on our podcast for the first time?
Excited, intrigued, and ready to get started.
I thought you were going to go for like 3 words that kind of went together there, like typical L&D person, try to think of an acronym or something that would work.
If it doesn't rhyme, it doesn't work.
We just thought, let's get straight in with a subject we know that you'll have a little bit of knowledge on and you'll feel comfortable with. And I guess some of this stuff is definitely stuff that comes up every day in our conversations. So today we're going to talk about potential triggers and issues that we see regularly, let's be honest, that can create conflict or challenge in a team. I'm sure that the viewers are going to be able to connect the dots with some of these themselves, right? And we don't just want to look at those triggers, we want to explore them a little bit and think, how can we mitigate them? Okay? Because for those of us who work in this space, we go, well, there's an answer to that. But we sometimes make an assumption that everyone must have sat down at some point and went, do you know what? There's a breakdown of communication here. We should do something about that.
Why does that happen?
Yeah, why?
Yeah.
Why? Ultimately, I guess what we were talking about earlier was that sometimes it can be you try to figure a situation out, you haven't quite put the thought into it yet. But also, when you're working with people for a long period of time, you make a lot of assumptions, don't you?
Yeah, I think even from the point of view of, do you actually know somebody or know someone to the point where you could have been annoying them for a prolonged period of time, and they've just been very polite and not said anything to you, but they've just been side-eyeing you for the last 15 years.
And do you know what? I think we've all had that moment where we've, been sat in a meeting and someone's doing the same thing again, or where, you're going to go work on a project with someone specific and there's this feeling of dread. You're like, it's not necessarily even always personal. It's just, their working practices don't match yours, or the way they, deal with a situation with a team as opposed to how you deal with a situation with your team just doesn't feel right. And I think there's a lot to be said about, well, I guess let's explore that. Why do you see it that way? Because for me, it's values a lot of the time. You measure against yours, don't you? So
yeah, I think even from how you externalize yourself to people, there could be. Well, we know everybody that's been in the workshops, and even from day-to-day life, sometimes you wake up, you have a great day, and everything flows really, really nicely. And then other days, it's horrendous, and you seem to be arguing with absolutely everybody. Or is it just the way that you're coming across on that day, or is there something that's going on to a deeper level around my understanding of you two, and why aren't you getting on with me today?
Just thinking about certain individuals, and even going back to certain situations I've been in, I think I'll go into James' point about your day starts off a certain way, and then the things that wouldn't bother you normally, you start to almost look for them, don't you? Some of the things we're going to talk about towards the back end of this podcast there around solutions is helping each other a little bit and saying, okay, when I see you do this, it feels like this is what we need to do, and I really appreciate candid honesty as an example, but other people are really uncomfortable with that, so you kind of need to tiptoe in a little bit and send a few smoke signals to let them know that things are not working. But ultimately, it's your job as human beings to forge the way and make sure the relationship's always on track. And relationships are the keystone of any working environment. And if we've seen this in loads of organisations we work in, they're performing extremely well in terms of their outcomes, but internally there's just this underbelly of discomfort between different teams. And sometimes it's your team's great, but then you go on the outside to another team, and that relationship, it's like, because we're so close in this team, we almost don't want to open up to this team over here. I was only working with an organisation this week that was talking about that a lot. They were saying some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, it's not so much in their specific team, it's the protective nature of, well, they're not doing that, so we're going to do this, and they're always doing this, so we never pass it to that team. And I was thinking, wow, okay, that's really tricky to navigate that, because that's a whole big thing, isn't it? It's not just about 2 people.
It's the processes behind it. So if they have deadlines to do their own work for data and analysis, for those that potentially like to think a lot more deeply, but then you have other people that don't really consider that and think, oh, well, yeah, it's supposed to be in today, but I'm not going to bother. That can cause conflict potentially as well.
In that bigger picture.
Yeah. And it's about not just understanding what your needs are, it's understanding how other people work so you can work more effectively together.
Definitely.
To prevent that conflict.
If you think about that, then the impact of either dealing with conflict or not recognising most of these triggers for conflict, what is the impact on, or that we've seen, and I know I've seen it, and we can all give examples, of the impact on culture of an organisation or a service?
Yeah.
Because when we see reports and deep auditing tools and auditing people with just organisations that's all they do is audit. But what are some of the impacts that we've seen just from that really high or bigger level of an organisation that's, if we don't manage these triggers for conflict and some of the causes for conflict within teams, what's the impact on an organisational's culture?
Well, I think the bigger, let's just make it really serious to start with. The biggest part of that is lack of productivity.
Yeah.
And pound signs. Let's be honest, because if you're not dealing with some of these things, even if your organisation is performing well, in inverted commas, there's an argument it could be performing better. You're going to have people leaving the organisation, so you're going to have people going through the door, in and out, revolving door. But also at a deeper level, people haven't got, there's blame culture, there's lack of kind of motivation to want to help each other, there's all those things, and ultimately that comes down to pound signs. So I think we've got to stick that in there as the main reason. But you're absolutely right. I think there's so many other things to consider there, isn't there, in terms of getting on top of this and actually how we can mitigate, if we can get in front of it rather than letting it formulate these siloed working behaviours. I guess I would even argue it affects your progression planning, because for some people they just go, I don't want to put in the extra effort, I don't want to do that job, I can see the stress that person's under. So yeah, I think I would summarise it in productivity outputs and pound signs. But the reality is, it's that culture is a funny word, isn't it? We always talk about this, it's like we talk about it to death, but reality is it's how you feel about going to work on a Monday morning, isn't it? And that makes a big difference to how that feels.
Especially when things are a little bit tougher than a normal great day.
Yes.
Is there anything from you, Kelly, that you've seen since with all your experience? Is there anything that you've seen in organisations that if we don't maybe address this, is there anything that you've seen from your point of view?
It can escalate rather quickly, okay? Or depending on the person, if they kind of internalise it and they keep it bottled up, maybe a little bit longer. But you find that miscommunication and not working effectively together can really affect the productivity of a team as well. And even down to, being able to get support from one person to the next. You may need information, you may need someone's expertise from a different department, but if you have that conflict, you're never going to get that information, because it'll be a case of, well, why would I want to help you?
I think that's a really good thing to link, actually, how support and high conflict or challenge. I mean, what we're talking about there really is there's a lack of psychological safety. There's a lack of psychological safety. There's a lack of speaking up. There's a lack of support. There's a lack of perceived support. I think that's another thing. We're going to use the word perceived a lot today, because it's what we formulate in our head. So we'll go, that person clearly hasn't shown me the care, therefore I won't ask for support. They expect me to do this by myself. I think that's a really good thing to land on, because I don't think people will often think about it like that. But in an environment that works, you want people being able to share their thoughts. We talk about trust and freedom as those two elements of psychological safety. Share their thoughts, share their opinions, have a say. We also want them to feel like they can fail well, they can
discuss mistakes,
discuss it, they can ask for support. That's a big one.
And being able to do that constructively as well.
Yeah.
So that is a really good point, but being able to advise, how you feel or how your perception is or your ideas or how it would work better without then turning that into an argument with somebody else. Can you see? So being able to voice, and that's where the safe place comes into play, I think, because then you're able to voice your opinion, but you need to remember to take on board other people's opinions.
Yeah.
Because I've seen that quite a lot as well.
I would agree. I would say that I've been in environments where it's always the loudest person that gets their point across, and I can see bubbling passive aggressiveness across the boardroom. So should we just soft touch some of the things that we see a lot?
Yeah, so just to sort of go through the headings of these, and obviously there's so much information around what people get annoyed with. And you can
just unpick that scab and
what annoys you when you turn around and go, pretty much everybody and everything.
Got an hour.
Hey, so we've put it under some sort of categories here. So for everybody, and again, we're going to have a little look at them, but for you, it might be that you have to really deep dive into your own context and your own example. So first of all, and the biggest one that I think we spoke a lot about, well, literally speaking a lot about, is communication.
Communicated a lot.
No pun intended, by the way. Then we've moved forward on to sort of personality clashes. So is it just me being me and you being you, Tracy Roberts? Nah, I'm not having it. I mean, you aren't going to get on because we haven't actually had the conversation or been able to delve into that information yet. Then we've got information conflict. So if you start to think about the way that things or information is spread or even given or received within your organisation, start to think about some of the detail in there. Then you've got fear of failure or even maybe micromanagement.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever met anybody that loves to be micromanaged.
No. I think some people like extreme guidance.
Yeah. which is still different to being micromanaged. Yes. So that's obviously one of them. We've got sort of that rejection element. If there is things that you're being rejected for or even not being considered, that's a different thing. And then the final sort of category we looked at is, which I think runs a little bit deeper than just some of the other headings we've looked at, but it's that fairness at work. So are people being treated in a fair, and is it the right thing to do? Are we doing the right thing by the people that we're actually working with?
There's so many things that you can go into, but the reality is a big part of one of the sections there is people and personality.
Yeah.
And that's probably the one that we deal with the most, as in people not spending the time to get to understand each other in the detail they need to, but it's not always about things like, because people say, well, and I get this a lot, I don't know if you guys get this in workshops as well there's some people like you want to get to know, and there's some people that you're happy just to get by and we interact, we wouldn't have a beer after work or whatever. I don't really want to tell them about what I did at the weekend and stuff, and we've got to almost stick a pin in that and say it's not about that. Sometimes that sometimes helps, but it's actually about getting to understand the other person in terms of what they bring, what they look like in their best, and how you can help bring that out.
Yep.
What their practices and preferences are, and we've got something to share on this later. Maybe even starting to notice the things that happen on the surface, so when they are frustrated, we spot that as well, and we figure out what part we play in that, or even if we don't play a part in that, how we can help them at that time. And I guess the other thing is that, we do fall into groupthink in our departments sometimes as well. So you can think of that as individuals, like you're built your way, I'm built my way, you're built yours. We've all got different lenses. Because of the work we do, we know how to meet in the middle. Other people don't always spend the time to do that, do they? But point being that, like, just taking a little bit of time, the amount of light bulb moments we have in a workshop sometimes where someone will go, they'll share in the room their practices and preferences and what puts them into a shadow state, in our language, like in a bad place. And people around the room go, oh, I've been doing that all along, And sometimes just breathing triggers that other person, and I'm saying that facetiously, but what I really mean is if I'm highly analytical and I ask loads of questions and I'm a bit more slow to process things and I like to, think things through, then I'm automatically going to trigger someone who is very much more, high levels of kind of decision making and wants the top level of detail, doesn't care if they fail, will just try again. Just by who I am, I annoy that other person. Bring that to a different level, then you take away some of those personality clashes. You understand people's methods and the way that they show up in their genius, i.e. how to help them be better. And you kind of break down some of the stuff around poor communication, because then you get to know what that person needs. Have you spent the time to do that with the people you work closely with recently? Because we can make assumptions, things change.
Yeah.
And we assume because we've always sent them an email format, that's the best way to do it. And actually, you hear that they go, I've never read that email. Never. What I'd really like from you is for you to come by my desk on a Monday at 10 and just give me the top level information I need.
It's like for some people, they get the weekly newsletter.
Yeah.
And it pings in their email, or it gets put through underneath the door, or whatever it is, whatever that environment is. And they just go, bin, exit, clear trash, whatever it is. And it's just going, well, why do you do that way? Well, actually, I'd rather just have a conversation. Yeah. I'd rather you just come and tell me what some of the wins are, some of the things that we've done really well. So
that's all part of a seek to understand.
Yeah, of course,
You'd say that's probably how I would summarise that.
It's that curiosity, isn't it, around people that you work with?
That's exactly the word I was thinking. Curiosity is a good word because it doesn't mean that it's not about overly sharing. It's not about, generalising and doing I almost hate the term team building to a degree because it just makes you cringe, doesn't it? But I think us at C2, we challenge that. Yeah. We challenge that. We say, we will give you an example of what that might look like, but we don't do it traditionally.
Yeah.
We do it in a way where we're being real about it, and some of that communication and personality clashes stuff you can iron out within a couple of hours.
Yeah,
but you've got to spend the time thinking about it.
Yeah, and considering it and understanding each other's preferences and how they work. So then you can come up to some form of compromise as well.
That's a good word, compromise. I don't think we do that enough, do we?
Well, if you're kind of taking that time to really consider how other employees are working but don't take the time to compromise, then you're never going to change that culture, that word we love. You're never going to really change it because you're not taking into consideration the best practices to support that person so you can get the best out of them to then be more productive and reduce conflict.
I think that ties quite nicely into some of the imbalances or balances in work. Yeah. When you've got somebody that is absolutely running through every brick wall for the organisation, and then you look to their left and there's somebody sat there and it's like, what do they do?
Are you aware?
I think there's people that have been doing so much work, and then all of a sudden that conflict arises because they feel as if they're doing a lot more than somebody else, and they're looking and they're going, well, what do you do?
But sometimes that's, again, I'm not sticking up for that person, by the way. But it's a difference in work ethic.
Yeah.
It's a difference in your role and responsibilities. It's a lack of understanding about that other person, because I guess for some of us it's very external. Everyone can see us doing stuff, and that other person could be absolutely hammering it, but in a different way. And I guess that's one thing we've got to look at is, I get that, because if we're not looking at it as a manager, let's think of it from a leader. What can we do there? We can check that everyone is doing what we want them to do. But there's also that displacement piece around people understanding and having reciprocity for each other. So just because you're the person that has to storm up and down the office 6 times to do your job doesn't mean that person sat behind the desk, or the person who leaves at 4 and you leave at 6 doesn't mean that there's any difference in your outcomes. Some people have the ability to get through a huge amount of work in less time. Some people like to take the time. Some people want to dial in it now because it makes them feel better. Some people have to switch off. So you're absolutely right. We've got to consider it, but from both sides.
Yeah. So let's consider the expectations and
on, I like that.
On performance and behaviour then.
Oh, I like
because
that.
if we're taking that sort of slant and being able to see both sides of that coin, if you like, well, let's start to think about, okay, so what is it from a performance point of view? What does good look like for you? What does good look like for me? And then actually, is there something where we actually need to work together on this project with that person? And this is the way we're going to do it.
Yeah, so it's kind of helping that level of understanding and reciprocity, isn't it? So from a leader's perspective, is it unfair? Is there an imbalance? Is there a lack of good perception about what that person does, and actually helping mediate that conversation sometimes? So that's definitely something that is, and actually I think I'm going to use rejection and micromanagement as a similar thing, but on opposite sides. Would you agree?
I totally agree, because again, they are kind of the opposite of the spectrum, because you've got that micromanaging or feeling that you're being micromanaged, depending on which view you see that. And then rejection is that, you've got that confidence to be able to go and give your ideas and give your thoughts and feelings for them to be completely dismissed.
Some people will assume that we talk about our 3 levels of delegation. Level 1 being we're being given clear instructions as to what to do, something when we deliver just on that. Level 2, a little bit of leeway where actually we say deliver it by this time in this way, but you've got this scope. Yep. Level 3 is here's an idea, get it back to me, and someone who
do it.
Yeah, do it however you want to. It's wonderful. And the thing about micromanagement is that for some people, because they don't know the job, is they're getting level 1 leadership in terms of delegation because they don't quite know what they're doing yet. Therefore, they feel like people are on them, but it's just because they're trying to help them embed the process. Level 2 is giving them a little bit of a say and increasing that psychological safety and trust in terms of what they can do. And level 3 is full carte blanche. Like, I completely trust you to go out there, and I'm never going to micromanage you. But that could look like rejection, because you could be working on all these things, and then you go to your boss and go, I've done this, and they go, that's not what I wanted.
Yeah.
And then that feels like rejection. So it's like, okay, maybe those two things are actually the same thing. It's the level of delegation you give people and the level you communicate at. So I need to check in with people, because here's a great example of that. Do I like micromanagement? No, it's one of my big triggers. But I also don't like it when I'm not kept informed or when I'm not given any feedback. So that makes me sound like a bit of a weirdo.
Not really, because I can relate to that. I can relate to that because you're giving the autonomy for your employees to go ahead and try and experience and learn. But you're saying, look, I'm trusting you to do this, but just let me know how we're getting on.
Yeah.
And I think that's really nice.
But it's about the observation as well, isn't it? So for me, it's not so much about me having to keep checking in. It's someone going, I saw what you did there. That was great.
Yeah.
And I think if you have conversations with people, you figure out the right balance of these things, and it works both ways. Like, some leaders will say to me, and we deal with this a lot, is like, I've had feedback from my leader in the exec team that I'm almost too supportive of my team. And I remember one conversation I had a couple of weeks ago with someone around, they see it as I'm overly supportive with my team. I see it as I'm highly empowering with my team.
Because we're talking about identifying and thinking about understanding individuals and building that rapport, if you like, around people. If it is that I join your organisation, Kelly's a great example of this, by the way. What sort of time frame are we looking at to maybe try and identify some of these things here, trying to get these processes in place for people? How quickly are we sort of thinking around, right, do I start this from day one and blow somebody's head off with all the detail of, right, and by the way, we don't conflict, so can you please communicate to me like this? Is there something, how do you see the world? What are your professional values? And people start to get really intense with it, and you go, whoa, hold on a minute, hold on.
I think there's a way, isn't there?
Okay.
There's a way. Here's the thing. If you look at all the stats, it takes the average person, I think the last study I read was around 18 months to really bed in, right? We also talk about the first 90 days of employment. Don't be like, what do we do there and how do we settle in? I would argue in that first 90 days, particularly for key people you're going to work with, you need to have a form of conversation that includes some of this stuff, but not in as an abrupt a way as that.
Yeah.
We've got an example we can share, actually, haven't we? And then that'll help us then explain why we need to do that. Yeah. But here's the thing, it's all about the energy and the effort, right? So one of the things that we use in some of our workshops to kind of deal with some of this, and also it's worth mentioning, there's a couple of things we didn't cover on there around information conflict. So the transparency horizon, as I call it, like what you see versus what they see, what you share, what you don't share. Some other things in there like meetings and what goes on in the meetings, what doesn't go on in the meetings. That's something else. This stuff that we're going to talk about now kind of helps with that.
And planning.
So we refer to many different things, including our Newton paradox for, understanding the idea of why these things trigger us in the first place and how we respond. One of the other things that we do refer to a lot is a lot of Michael Bungay-Stanier's books. And in his latest one, which is called How to Work With, and it's got in brackets, almost anyone, because there must have been someone he's met that he hasn't been able to work with. He kind of like floats this idea of these keystone foundation conversation questions. And to us that work in this industry, we were like, actually, that's a really great, simple model to follow. But also, most people would probably, when you start explaining why it's important, they'll go, I get it. But you do think to yourself, why haven't you done that then? Because again, we make an assumption because we spend time around people. So the idea behind the keystone conversation is that you provide safe, vital, repairable base. Yep. So you've built on that. So you've built on the psychological safety. Part of the psychological safety is all that removing fear, being able to speak up, being comfortable together. But here's the other thing, support, challenge and accountability. You've got to be able to go, I'm going to challenge you. You've got to have capacity to take some of the rough stuff that comes up. And you've also got to be able to have the resilience to bounce back. Now, the Keystone Conversation questions help you do that. Because imagine if you could do this with every person you met, right? You write your answers down to these questions. And you say, here's my answer on this, what's yours? And then you do the mediation element of, okay, well, if that's how you do it, I do it this way, what does the middle look like? Does that make sense? Yeah. So the best advice I could give everyone is to go through these questions yourself, and then we'll give you a little bit of why this helps in a second, right? So the first question is the amplify question. What's your best? So if you were to explain to someone you were just about to work with, and it would be like, okay, on a good day, this is what I bring to the team. And it includes things like what energy I bring, my personality traits, also my expertise, my skills, my attributes, all those things. And you explain it to that person in such a way where they go, oh, I understand what makes you light up now and what you bring me. That's great. I love that. The second one is, what are your practices and preferences? And we call this a steady question. This is basically, what do you need to be good? Yeah. Does that make sense? So do you start early? Do you like emails? Do you prefer to speak to people? Does it really bother you when people don't loop you in on conversations? You know, all those little things that add up to those tiny little triggers that become big triggers. Then you've got the good date question. What can you learn from successful relationships? What you're really saying there is, for the people you've worked with previously that have been the bomb, they've been brilliant. What was it?
Yeah, what was it about that?
What was it about that person that when you sit and think of them, you smile? When you really reflect on it, you will always go to the other person for some form of blame or why. You'll say it was only because they were really good at doing X. But actually, it's because you put the same energy in, I would argue. At a certain point, they've triggered you, you've responded a certain way, and you've continued to do that. So actually, part of that is, I'm telling you what I don't like in a relationship, but I'm also going to admit what part I played in that at times. And then the last one is a repair question, right? How will you fix it when things go wrong? So part of this is, okay, if me and you were going to work together, and I know this about you and you know that about me, can we just agree on what that looks like when we have to challenge each other, or when we have a tough week, or you're kind of, I don't know, triggering me slightly or whatever? How does that look? And you might go, just tell me, which you probably would.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, I'd have to say to you, well, actually, I would just tell you. But say I was a fictitious person who wouldn't just tell you. I would say, okay, well, I'm going to find that difficult. So how can we meet on middle ground so that actually it doesn't go on for longer than 24? It might even be that your rule is it can't go on for any longer than 24 hours. So this is what we're going to do. But you're absolutely right. It's not a one size fits all approach, and everyone's vision's slightly different. Everyone's slightly more, and I would even go, it sometimes changes on the mood of the person sometimes as well, where they are in their life and what's been going on for them that week. And I think it's important to remember that. And here's the thing about these questions. We can't set them at the beginning of a relationship and leave it at that. We've got to revisit them, and we've got to go back and say what's happened and what's changed, or is nothing's changed. Let's keep doing that. Yeah. I always kind of liken it to keeping lots of pans bubbling. You know, you've got to put energy into the relationship, haven't you? And if you don't put energy into a relationship, it fizzles. Yeah. And here's the thing about the repair question. When you're in a normal relationship or outside of work, a friend, a partner, whatever, how we fix it when things go wrong just naturally happens because you get to know people and you've got a bit of a routine. Well, I go in a mood for 10 minutes and that person goes away and then we come back together, and it's but in a work relationship, it can be catastrophic because if you're both absolutely stubborn, I know people I've never got on with since one argument I had, way back at the beginning of my start of my career with that particular company, or they just always rattle me as a gremlin in my system. So every time I go in a meeting room, I'm bubbling. But I have literally managed teams where people have never got on, and they've never repaired it. And no matter what we've done as an intervention, it's been too late.
It's gone.
So I would argue that if you know the answers to this yourself and you approach people in the right way, you'll get their responses, even if they need to think about it because they're highly analytical and they want to write it down. Something to revisit, isn't it, in your catch-ups? And the only other thing I was going to mention here was going back to communication. The example I was going to use was, it's not just about like you and another person, it's about teams. So I was talking to a coaching client the other day, and she was talking about how she knows her behaviour affects her team. So what she said was, I'm really protective of my team. And because there's lots of other stuff going on, we're all fighting for budget and we're all trying to do our piece of the pie, we all get a little bit protective. So when it's the other team wants something, she said, my instant reaction as a leader is to, let's just keep that in here and let's just do the information handling and let's not help too much until we know we're safe and all the rest of it. And she said, she had a moment in our coaching session when she went, oh, I'm the catalyst to this, haven't I? Because I'm trying to protect my team, which is the right thing. But the message is coming across as information, keep it here. Don't go too far out. And don't step too far out there because it's a bit scary out there and all the rest of it. And that in itself was part of the reason why some of the relationships on the wider team wasn't working so much. And I absolutely loved the fact she was that vulnerable that in a moment she went, oh, So I think even we can, as leaders, think about this is, individually, would this be a good thing to go through as a team? Yes, 100%. But ultimately, there's a reason why everyone sees things in a different way. And I guess going back to the why, let's go there, because this is how to mitigate it, I guess, if you've got an opportunity. That's the sort of triggers we see, or the ones we've spoken about. But why does that happen? Well, it happens because our lenses are all different, right?
They are.
Yeah, and I think there's some types or some elements of the why that some people listen to this. If we just go through a few of them, they might go, that's definitely why it annoys me. That's why I get into that conflict. That's why I have this feeling towards this person when I'm in this team. And it could even be because you've put a load of work in, a load of effort, a load of time. Remember, time is the same for everybody. Doesn't matter whether you've got £1 or £1 million in your pocket, it's still 24 hours in the day. But when you think about that, if you committed a percentage of that time to your project, work, day, whatever it is, you are still trying to achieve things. You're trying to achieve goals, and as part of that team, you may be getting it together. But then all of a sudden, senior leaders come in, and the great, sometimes in some organisations, we've had examples where you've done all this work, you've stepped into this environment, you're nearly over the finish line, and then someone comes in and says, oh, actually, forget about that. We're going to try and do this over here now.
So many things in the equation there.
What do you mean? We have just committed 3 months of
power, time,
energy into doing this, and then all of a sudden, the goalpost just goes. Ooh.
And that's, a lot of it is down to, I think we said this, your value system, and that's someone who's got high work ethic, high finisher completer in their system. And for them, that's just been a waste of resource and time. And then they feel we were going back to rejection. There's all those things. There's also people who are want to achieve things, and they set out to do goals. And if people get in the way of that, or it makes their job more laborious or hard, you've got that in the equation. But I think all those things have a little bit of work ethic differences in there, don't they? For other people, if they can't just get on with the job themselves, and they have to go and reach out and
it's all those rules.
All the rules, that can be a bit of a trigger too. And if you're someone who's a bit of a rule breaker, that's going to be an equation. If you haven't got enough information, and people are holding information, that's a big one. And then you look at it and you go, are they holding the information from me because they don't know, or is it because they want to?
Yeah, some people don't like rules and regulations, and they probably hate somebody saying, but yeah, you can't do that. If you flip it and you don't have any rules or not enough rules, it's kind of what direction. It's like, we're all having a party because there's no rules, but it doesn't matter because we're still doing each other's work in our own way with no set policies or procedures and practices in place, but that's fine.
So essentially, think of it like this: you've got a set of lenses on. Your lens is in goes into your systems, the book of you, it's your unconscious motivators, what you need to be in your best self. For people who've gone through workshops with us, they'll have really got into that and thought, right, what really drives me? But I do think, even if you haven't, it's worthwhile thinking, what's your values? Like, what do you value? So do you value people around you being energetic, driven, glass half full, all the rest of it? Do you like a rule? Do you hate a rule? Because then when you are working with someone else, you can automatically then start to figure out, why is it that person does get to me so much sometimes? It's not even around their top of the surface behavior and their energy. Sometimes it's just about the way they do things, but you've got to think why. So I always ask this question: what am I missing? From that other, or what can I learn from this person? Because there's always something,
and that is really key. So I have a really good example of this. I don't like slow moving people, and I used to work within a team and manage that team. And I would be going, they used to call me the bull in a china shop. I go from 0 to 100. I wanted to get to that end goal. Great, this is what we're going to implement. Let's do it next week. And I had to be really cautious of those people because they needed them analytical. Rules and regulations came up quite a bit at that time. Even though I do like rules and regulations, I completely disregarded them. So I wanted to get to the other side.
Which is why she's moved out of HR full time now.
But I've always said, tell me. Like, if I am doing that, tell me and be open and honest with that.
Yeah.
And luckily, this person did say to me, 1 minute, can you just rewind a little bit? Because we need to do this, this, and this, and this. I'm like, right, okay, maybe I just need to wind it down a little bit and come back to your to your way of working and thinking.
Why do they need it? So
Yeah.
you're thinking like, are you, so if people ask questions and slow things down, people who go move fast, you think, why are you challenging me? Why are you getting in my way? And actually we've got to go, why do they need that information, or why do they want me to slow down? And I think that's a good example of actually how you can use something to your advantage.
Yeah.
Like, what can I learn here? And, you know, what's the benefit of me slowing down? Well, actually, they've just pointed out 3 things that would help. So that's actually about using that other person as the barometer. Just, do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and the thing with doing that, it actually helps to speed up a little bit the project in question.
Yeah.
You know, someone else's different perspective. But if that person hadn't been open and honest, because we had that, you know, built of that kind of professional relationship, the project could have taken longer because we wasn't.
You're trying to move faster, but it's taking longer.
Yes, and you're not considering,
Yeah.
well, actually, we need to do this and this.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So again, as part of like your consistent triggers, thinking about what comes up a lot, I think we've written this down, like what is the trigger that you're seeing a lot?
Yeah.
And why is there conflict in that situation or for you? Why is it bothering you so much? And can you connect it with like some of your values and the way you do things?
And that links into the question when you talked earlier about the Keystone Foundation conversation about, you know, what can you learn from successful relationships and what can you learn from frustrating? Well, in the working environment, you're going to learn that on a daily basis, but it's taking just that step back and answering that question.
I like that, yeah.
In that moment.
I think there's a lot of in the process moments here to consider, but also reflection. Like you say, like when you come out of that meeting, you are frustrated. What was the trigger?
Yeah.
And you know, why was it causing you, or why did it put you into conflict with that person? And if you're getting, another thing to consider is if it's giving you internal conflict, or did it come out?
Yeah.
So are you going away passive aggressive? Are you an imploder? That's what I always say. Like, some people just let it build and build and build, smile and wave. And other people are like, okay, I got into it there because that's my personality, and did that through the other person. So just the fact of you challenging them in front of other people. And I think the trigger, why it's bothering you so much, can you connect it to your kind of like your lens, if you like? Yeah. And actually, what's the risk of it in the long term? So I guess if I think about people I've had, I'm going to say challenge or conflict, because the word conflict makes it sound like you're always in an argument with someone, and you're not. It's just that you're not as open to their ways, and you're probably close to developing that relationship sometimes.
I think just on that, there is healthy levels of conflict.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I know that I've had some right ding-dongs with some people. And I mean, it has been to the point where it's nearly tipped over to unhealthy conflict. Well, yeah, no.
Sorry, GDPR.
But I know that I've been in those situations where I've really pushed someone right to the limit. I felt okay. They have definitely not felt okay. And that's when I've read the room in a sense and said, right, well, hold on a minute. Just step back. I know I've made mistakes in the past where I've maybe just gone and this and that and pushed it too far. Mm-hmm. I've also ended up having to apologise to that person afterwards. Yeah, because then I recognise that actually that's not what healthy challenge or healthy conflict looks like. So I think that how long you've maybe been in this level of challenge or conflict, because some people, it can really drain their energy from people. Yeah. I know that when you're stepping into an environment and you know that one meeting with that one person that's part of the team, and you go,
I think we can all probably relate to that. I can think of half a dozen people in my career that have had that effect on me. But you're right, it's like, how long has that been going on for? Because that's not healthy for you. It's not healthy. Here's the other thing we always say about, like, relating back to radical candor. Half these people don't know they're doing anything wrong. Yeah. And that's the big thing to remember, isn't it? They're just being them, you're just being you. And ultimately, you're both viewing the world through different lenses.
There could be something that's got absolutely nothing to do with anything to do with work that is impacting them and the way that they show up for that day, for that meeting. Yeah. And if we can't, and it's not about being nosy and going, oh, and what's wrong with you then? It's actually to the point where we go, are you okay? Because 2 weeks ago, you was absolutely fine. You was presenting yourself in a really good way. But now, all of a sudden, I'm seeing something slightly different.
So blind forgiveness a little bit sometimes as well, isn't it?
Of course,
Because knowing that we all have that little blip. And
definitely.
And also, here's the thing: it's sometimes not even about the work; it's just about your energy being different. Like, I've thought of slow moving people I've worked with before, and I've been triggered by them before going in the room. And I have to check in with myself. I think they're great people. There's nothing wrong with them per se. It's just I've got to slow my mind down. Yeah. And then part of that, the strategies part was to think about how you can plan for the next time that might happen, but also I would argue how you revisit some of this keystone. Even part of that conversation, so that it's not about just putting in a strategy to cope with it. It's about actually trying to get over it and deal with it, and for you guys to resolve in some shape or form.
Yeah, and there's a number of different ways that we can actually resolve or even create an environment of healthy challenge or healthy conflict, because it's needed, by the way. If we just say yes all the time, we end up doing everything that Martin wants us to do at T2 or what you want us to do, Tracy. Which we do, because that's the way it works here. But I'm joking, by the way. But understanding that if it is that we can try to get in front of some of these triggers, well, what impact could that have on the teams? And is it that actually people enjoy going to work because they're not walking into an environment where they feel as if they're not being listened to, or for all of the reasons that we've discussed. Yeah. And if it is that we start to understand, if I was going to challenge you, and I'm interested in what advice you could give other people as well, by the way. So if we needed, for whatever reason, to step into this environment where this is what challenge and conflict, healthy challenge looks like for us, how would I do it for you, Tracy, and how would I do it for you, Kelly?
I think that's a good question to ask, because a lot of people will come up with the same answer. Just tell me. And we know that's not right.
No, it's not right.
Because just tell me can be lots of different ways. It can be sit me down when I've calmed down a bit and then let's just talk about what's just happened. Yeah. Or it could be, can I just stop you right there? Can I just tell you what you just did to, and it's even the body language sometimes. For some people, just tell me means let me just decompress after that meeting and then come and see me. Some people, it's like catch me in the corridor. So I get, and it's the demeanor, isn't it? For me, it's about I will be challenged as long as I don't feel like you're challenging me. And what I mean by that is if it seems personal or it seems abrupt or it feels like you're throwing blame, that will land very differently to me as opposed to, do you know what, Trace? When we were just doing that thing there, I felt a little bit like this, and maybe I read it wrong, but it came across like this. Was I reading that right? I'm totally open to that. If someone says, I didn't like this and da-da-da, and you did this. And so for me, it's like, I'm totally open to challenge. But if you come at me, like, I will respond. Even if I know I'm wrong, I will probably put my guard up and I'll calm down, and the next day we'll kind of get over it. But the reality is, I said, tell me, but it's the way you tell me.
It's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So, for example, I don't mind being challenged, but don't come into a room and then point at me in front of the whole office with your challenge in a kind of derogatory way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come up to me, normally a cup of tea or coffee, and say, can I just have a word? Take me into a different room so we can really be open and honest without the reflection of others. Yeah, because then you find that you have that challenge. You'll probably agree with me more now, James. You have that challenge, but then you find in a group of people in an office, someone else will pipe up, and then somebody else will have their say, and then it feels more of an attack.
Yeah.
From my perspective. So I'm all for slow down.
Yeah.
You've been a bit pushy today. What's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for anybody that doesn't know how to challenge the people that they directly report into or report to, then is that you're understanding that if you haven't had that conversation, why not?
Yeah.
Is because
you're making assumptions.
That could be the biggest thing for if I ever needed to feedback to Kelly or feedback to you, Tracy. And by the way, I'm exactly the same as that. So if it is that we haven't considered that, or we haven't considered what healthy challenge is to us, then are we ever going to get to the resolve element and the way of working that works for us, rather than just the one that works for the whole organisation? And again, if you are making assumptions,
we've got to make it safe, vital and repairable in every relationship we have. We've got to look for patterns. We've got to try and get in front of the patterns. We've got to revisit regularly. We've got to think about making it like an individual thing for each person. And also we've got to consider that everybody has a bad day, and we've got to be conscious of the lens we have on, because the lens we have on has the ability to just make our life really, really rubbish, in all honesty, because once we see one small thing, particularly if we're having a bad day, we see something else. And just being able to have these sort of conversations with people will make things far, far more productive. The pound signs start, becoming a little bit more realistic, and ultimately people do. I mean, this is, what's culture, like we said earlier, how you feel about coming to work on a Monday. And for me, that's the thing. And you can have pockets of sunshine in every organisation, but also think about that might be okay in your team, but constantly we get this, that team's okay, but we don't like working with that team. Think about what that looks like for teams as well, because it's not just about individuals. And if you're the leader of that team, it's okay to be protective of your team. That's amazing. That's definitely a quality that I like, and I think I inhibit. But at the same time, think about how you can help them improve their relationships with others as well, and increase the safe, vital, repairable element. Because do you know what? Innovation happens there. People share ideas. People get behind each other that they normally wouldn't. And do you know what? I always say this. It increases the chances of people backing you up in a room when you're not there.
Yeah.
I really do think that. And that's what we need more of, isn't it, in organisation?
Definitely. And you've got that sense of feeling valued.
100%.
But not just one individual, groups, then teams, then departments, then the whole organisation as well.
Maybe examining the patterns you see in your teams, maybe in your organisation, trying to pull that apart a little bit. Think about, safe, vital, repairable relationships that you already have. So they would be the people on your good day questions, and maybe the people where there's a little bit of that missing. And why is that? Revisit regularly, have conversations, don't bottle it up. Think about the best way of communicating, and above all else, think about how you can get people talking open and honestly, but in the language that they like to hear. And I think that's the important thing. So thank you, James.
Thank you, Tracy.
It was a pleasure as always.
As always.
Kelly,
Thank
an
you.
absolute pleasure for your first podcast. We will see you again soon for another People Performance podcast.